Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures, a show where my guests and I get to explore entrepreneurial stories, market landscapes, problem spaces, and examine together how new ventures might be able to be created, either for-profit, nonprofit, or personal ventures to benefit humanity. Really, the purpose of this show is to educate and inspire a new generation of venture builders and venture investors to make the world a better place. In today's episode, my guest is Alex Skillman. She is an experienced public relations expert. And we don't often get to hear the stories of the people who connect founders and celebrities to the journalists and influencers that write about them. And so we have a treat today to be able to dive into the details, to look behind the curtain, to see what goes on behind the scenes in order to help get the story out. So we talk about, from a startup perspective, how founders should be thinking about messaging their story, when they should hire a PR person, what to look out for when hiring a PR person, how to incorporate that strategically in their go-to-market strategy, how to work with PR people moving forward, how to deal with journalists and influencers, what that landscape looks like today, and more. So if you are listening to this show, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com. And there you'll see links to the different show notes and resources that we talk about today. And if you're watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Alex Skillman. All right, Alex, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on and talk about public relations and how we can help entrepreneurs.
All right, really glad to have you. So why don't you start, just tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I was born and raised Southern California, went to school in LA and, was following the Hollywood dream. I wanted to be a producer and an agent. I was a business major. So I was fortunate enough to start my career at Walt Disney Company and worked there 5 years. I was able to work first in film production. My internship, I started as a senior and then kept going after graduation. And that was great. I mean, I think it's wonderful to really, for anyone to start their career at the bottom, but that's where you're like a sponge and you absorb and you learn everything. And we interacted with the film lot, like actual production office. So we really saw how a movie was made, not all the suits and all that, but truly the people making the movie, the grips and location managers and all of that. And I really enjoyed it, but I wanted to do something a little more creative. So I was looking either at the creative side or in marketing, because that's what my emphasis was when I was undergrad at business. So a job came open in television publicity, and then that's what sort of kicked me off doing PR. So it was right there still at Disney. What was great about that is talk about just diving in. If anyone's not familiar with, anytime there is a new movie coming out or a new season of a TV show, and all of a sudden you see all these actors on every different talk show. That's what the PR person does. They're booking that actor on all the talk shows. And we're actually the one that pulls all the clips. When you see the clips of a movie, that's usually the PR person who has pulled that clip. And back in the day, we were actually the one that wrote the little description that went into TV Guide or on the screen. Oh, that's actually from us. So it was great experience. Got to work with a lot of famous people and not so famous people. What was awesome is working on home improvement. That was obviously a cornerstone for Disney. It went 8 years. I was there at the tail end of that. And so you're doing a lot of reactive public relations because everybody wants to talk to Tim. And so you have to sort of weed it out. And then on the flip side, I was working on a show on the WB, and we actually had Destiny's Child on, and Access Hollywood would not take them because at the time they were not a household name. And so sometimes you're in the reverse where you're having to sell Access Hollywood, Entertainment Tonight, why they want to come and cover whatever episode that is for that week. Because typically in television, you have your table read on a Monday. You tell the photographer what still shots you want, like midweek, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday is when you tape. Usually in front of a live audience on Friday if it's a sitcom. So yeah.
That's great. So for those not familiar, just it kind of in a nutshell, what is PR? Everybody talks about
Sure.
PR. What, just if you were to define it, how would you define it?
Well, public relations is what I always tell people, it's the opposite of advertising. Advertising you paid for. So if you pay for that ad in a magazine, on a website, you're scrolling, that is landscape you have paid for. PR is not paid for. So when, as I mentioned, that actor that is either being interviewed by the New York Times because they have a new movie coming out or a new video game that's about to come out, and all of a sudden you see it in all the gaming publications, that you don't pay for. Now, we can get into that a little bit later. Now, things that have gotten a little different in today's landscape with earned media and influencers.
Yeah.
But for the most part, PR is free in terms of you're not paying the New York Times to publish that article or that interview. That is their job as a journalist, to interview whatever their subject and beat is. For journalists, it's their beat. So their beat could be healthcare, it can be entertainment, it could be book reviews.
And they're always looking for good stories. So a good relationship with their PR folks makes their job easier. Essentially, it sounds like.
Yes. Well, and that is, sometimes we try and package a story as best as possible so it makes their life super easy. So they just pretty much plug and play. Like, we come up with a story angle, which is basically sort of their story angle, and then we give them all the ingredients, and they, finesse it a little bit. But I've sometimes seen my actual pitch verbatim per word in the exactly published. Like, the journalist didn't change anything.
That's great. So you were at Disney doing PR for how long?
I was at the company for 5 years. So part of that was first in film production, but the majority was in television publicity. And what was great back then, as I said, you got to work with, maybe well-known entities or television shows. But then I also was fortunate enough to work with Aaron Sorkin when he launched Sports Night. So Aaron Sorkin is the creator of The West Wing, The Newsroom. He wrote A Few Good Men, The American President. So that was a lot of fun because great acting. We had Felicity Huffman, Josh Charles, Peter Krause on that show. So that was really smart TV. And I think it was sort of before its time. I think it probably would have ended up, instead of on ABC, probably a cable station at this, or a cable channel at this point. Yeah. So I was at Disney for 5 years, and then after that, I went over to an entertainment PR firm, got to work a red carpet. Those are some fun times because they literally would say radio, oh, so and so's coming, and then I would have to tell the press corps who that person was.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times they don't know, and it's like, oh, that girl, she just had that new show that launched. Oh yeah, or she's dating so and so. Oh yeah.
Right.
And it was kind of embarrassing if you would tell them who's coming down and then there's no cameras going off, there's no interaction. So you try and just make the actor, just keep going. It's okay. And then, of course, the one that, they all want to talk to, sometimes they don't want to talk, the talent. So
Right.
I was very fortunate to actually not work with many divas, or, I actually worked with some pretty wonderful people who appreciated everything that life had given them, their success, their talent. And actually, just this last weekend, Sean Connery passed away. I worked with him on the Rock, and so I remember in my day, I feel like that was just yesterday, and of course it wasn't. But I didn't realize he was 90. So a lot of times you do become very close with the people you work with, both the cast and crew. Like with Home Improvement, our every Friday after we'd wrap, we'd go to the Equestrian Center in Burbank. So it's certainly not glamorous what you would think of Hollywood, but and I think our holiday party one year was at a bowling alley in the valley. But you know, um, it was a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
So then, where did your journey take you from there?
Well, and quickly, as you said, your relationships as a PR person are your bread and butter. And so, what was great is I had garnered all these national media contacts working at Disney because when you say, "Hi, it's Alex from Disney," people usually take your call, and usually you're working with talent that they want to interview. So it becomes, we have to both, it's a relationship that has to work both ways. So after television, I went into video games, so interactive entertainment, back when it was, a very small industry, and not in terms of dollars, but in sort of recognition compared to what it is today.
Mm.
And that is one thing that I would tell everyone is one of the most important things about PR is you are a storyteller. You are taking, whether it's the brand, a product, a actor, a television show, a video game, and you are sharing that narrative not only with consumers but with the media. And so when I first started working in video games, we had Tony Hawk. He was with Activision, but they didn't close the loop on the deal for Dreamcast. So we actually had the Sega Dreamcast Tony Hawk game. And so I said, why aren't we pitching, you know, mainstream media? Because at the time, Tony Hawk was still very, very famous, like he is now. We also had Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC. And so I said, why aren't we pitching, talk shows and, daily newspapers and men's publications like Maxim and stuff. And so instead of just the video game publication, so I was able to take and get, one of our video games on the Rosie O'Donnell show, and ABC News covered. I worked for a local Southern California Crave Entertainment, and we were able to get on ABC News during E3, which is the big video game conference held annually. And so it just elevates a company, and it gives them validation when you're not only just in your niche publications, but you're also being reported on in the New York Times, USA Today, and so forth.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So after video, so I stayed in video games for quite a while. I actually sort of combined my experience and went back to a studio. I worked at Universal Studios, and was head of PR, director of PR for a couple of the different labels, Black Label Games and Universal Interactive, and that was when Vivendi owned Universal. So we were able to have our own IP, which was Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon for all you video game folks out there. But then we also worked with Amblin, so I was sort of with Steven Spielberg, and having to explain to them with Jurassic Park that violence sort of, because they said, oh, we can't have any screenshots published where there's a dinosaur holding a person in its mouth. And I said, but it's video games, and it's, we've got to, the publication wants to sell some magazines. So there was a little bit of translation between sort of film and gaming. It was really fun. I got to meet John Carpenter, who did the movie The Thing. So we went back into the Universal archives and created an amazing game around that movie, which was a lot of fun.
Nice.
But especially when I was at Universal, that's also dealing with corporate communications. As I said, like I had to be in touch with Universal corporately and what they wanted to talk about and what our business unit was dealing with. So even though we were part of this huge publicly traded company, we as the video game unit were kind of small. So it was sort of like a startup, but having to deal with the red tape of a big company. So, and sometimes those two didn't always see eye to eye.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Right. So then, where did you go from there? Sounds like your journey led you into working more in marketing and with businesses and startups. And so, tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, so then from there, spent 10 years in the Bay Area, and I went up and first worked with electronic arts. So, staying in gaming, and launched the Sims 2 for Will Wright and the famous Sims franchise. And that was really probably one of the best examples of, as I said, taking your story and telling it to different audiences
Mm.
and how you create that narrative for the different audiences that appeal to them. So with The Sims, we were the first video game ever published in Teen Vogue.
Mm.
So Teen Vogue, even though a lot of their readers, girls were playing games at the time, but they just didn't cover it. And then so with the Sims, it was such a big franchise for EA, and definitely people don't realize, but public relations can affect a stock price. Like when The Sims debuted, it blew sales out of the water. And for EA, the reason why that was so important is that was one of their only IPs that they owned. Because of back in the day, The Sims was and their own proprietary franchise. Instead of, they had Madden and Tolkien and all these other ones that they don't get the full cut because they're having to share it.
Sure.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it was a great example of, we still had our cover story on Computer Gaming World, but yet also Teen Vogue and USA Today and the Financial Times did a whole feature story on the financial aspect of what that franchise meant to Electronic Arts. And so that's a great example of how you can take one product or one, brand and then diversify its story to appeal to many different audiences. So that is, to go back to when you ask what is public relations, it's really, increasing awareness of whether it's a product, a brand, a company with a targeted audience. And your audience could be a B2B example, like if you're in healthcare and you have to sell your product to hospitals, or it, like all of these, are the general public. And that general public can be as wide of a net as just everyone, or a very specific narrow group of people. Like if you are doing something in the wellness space, and then even dive deeper into keto, and then or vegan, so you really have to tell your story where why it appeals to that target audience. And one thing that I always tell people is, you want to ask yourself, what problem am I solving? Like, why should anyone care? Like, first, why should a reporter care to interview you and cover your product or your brand or your company? And then that goes to, okay, then you tell, basically the reporter, this is why your readers will care. They will want to, this piece of technology is going to make their life easier.
Right.
They may not see the technology, but it will make their life easier. So I think that's also something very important as you're embarking on um, coming up with your strategy for public relations, is what problem am I solving? And one of the first steps we always do is a messaging workshop where you hone in on that key main message. So if you are stuck in an elevator with a reporter from the New York Times and he says, well, what do? You want to make sure you have a concise boom, boom, boom answer that isn't, and so by the time they're getting off the floor, you're still talking and they still don't know what you do. And you just lost an opportunity to possibly, be in the New York Times. So you want that main message to really resonate. And then you can have 3 or 4 sub messages that support that main message. what is it that is, are you the world's first or this or that? And is it because of your design? Is it because of your technology? Is it because of your innovation? And then you support that. And it really is communication. So I know in we've had other talks where brand identity, when a company is first starting, and then when a PR or marketing communication person comes in, they take that core brand and then amplify it to how it will relate to a broader audience. And then your brand will keep developing as your product grows, because there could be a sector of an audience that you didn't even know would like your product. But then all of a sudden you're finding, either whether it's Facebook ads or media that are interested, or also how media talk about your products. Like I had a product that we had positioned it to CNET, one of the top tech publications. And then his viewpoint was completely sort of different, and it made us rethink our strategy. So sometimes press can also be a good, because you just live in a silo, right? Maybe you're a startup and you're just, all of you are drinking the same Kool-Aid, and then you get this total third party outside point of view, and it's like, whoa, we didn't even think that that's how someone would perceive us. But so press can also be very good in that way, especially in the beginning as you're learning to sort of talk about your product and have it evolve. And um, just yeah, so so yes, I spent 10 years in the Bay Area. So that's where I worked with a lot of tech companies, e-commerce, from, you know, app launches to the latest gadgets to smart assistant, like sort of rode that wave of when, you know, Amazon and the Echo and all of that was first coming out. And, you know, and you sort of have to identify and try and keep the public interested. And I think also PR can help do that. It can help with either if there's any negative press, because, you know, when Amazon first launched the Echo, people then, oh, Big Brother is listening. So then PR can sometimes help craft. You can set up interviews with certain journalists to let that executive say, you know, reassure the public or give a different standpoint. So PR can be used in many different ways. It can be used, sure, just to, you know, make sure, you know, John Smith in Arkansas knows that there's this latest crowdfunding campaign about to launch and he should back this campaign because of why. Or it can be used to help massage and sort of deflect a message that is getting out into the public that you don't like.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're in the Bay Area. Are you still working with EA at this point, or at what point do you launch out and start working on your own business?
So yeah, that was, I left. They just couldn't find. You know, it was a contract just to get. It was a project, and so I launched Sims 2, and that wrapped up. So then I actually went to a global PR firm, and that's where I had clients as big as Adobe to very small startups, and worked with them for quite a while. And then, believe it or not, I was left them to go back in house. So, you know, they're in public relations. You have your PR agencies that have many different clients, and then you have in house people. So it can depend on what, you know, a company needs to look at. Is it better we do it all in house, or we have a agency, or both? Actually, I think it's nice when you have someone inside the company that at least can speak the language that the agency is speaking. So it's sometimes nice to have that cohesive team. And so I went with this a Wi-Fi mobile company, and they weren't quite ready to launch. And one of their investors was a fine and estate jeweler in the Bay Area, and he was launching an e-commerce part of his brick and mortar, and I had e-commerce in my background. So that is sort of when I started consulting, and that is also when and it shows you it's storytelling. So with the Bay Area fine and estate jeweler, I got him on the Today Show because he had this orange diamond, which is really rare, and I coined it the world's $1 million pumpkin, and we were on Halloween because it's per carat, it's over $1 million. And going back to the sound bites, um, he was on Halloween, and I kept having to media train him. I go, you cannot be long winded. It's live television. You got to be quick, and also you got it like mom is getting kids ready for school, like she's sort of half listening.
Right.
Um, and or people are just getting ready for work, so they have it on in the background. And sure enough, I was actually at a football tailgate about a week after that, and right behind me this guy said, oh, on the Today Show I saw this thing about this orange diamond, it was the coolest thing. And he rattled off like our three main message points.
Great.
And I turned around, I said, hey, I placed that. And so it was just so nice. I'm like,
That's great.
wow, all that media training paid off. So that's a good example of like, you really want to be very concise, whether you're a live TV show or honestly also like at a conference or a trade show. Media are flying through there. I've done CES many times, and everyone's worried I'm late for my next appointment. So tell me, what's this thing? Tell me, quick. And so you really gotta, that's where your key messaging really has to be very tight and concise. And I think that's why it's a group effort. It's maybe the person who helped develop your brand in the very beginning, it's obviously the people who are the inventors or the creators. And then it's folks like us who know how to massage that where it's relatable to either, someone, even media who that's their beat, they may not be as up to speed as you are with your technology. And so they may just not understand or be at your level of comprehension. So that's why that key messaging is so important.
Got it. Cool. So you're at this big firm, and then at what point do you launch out and start your own
Yeah,
business?
so that's right around when I started working with this fine estate jeweler. And unfortunately, that Wi Fi mobile tech company that he was an investor in, I worked with them briefly, but then the recession hit. It was 2008, 2009. So then I was let go. And then that is when I started on my
Mhm.
own. And that was right also when social media was just getting going. So
Yeah.
I really sort of helped brands navigate that in the very beginning from, how do we incorporate that messaging just in organic posts on Facebook and Twitter. Um, Instagram wasn't around yet, but that was when brands realized they had another avenue to communicate with consumers and with media too. I mean, that's also all of a sudden it just everybody became more accessible, right? I mean, all of a sudden you were hearing from a celebrity what they're tweeting like in real time currently what they're doing. A press person is talking about what they're writing about. And so it was, and then for a company it was a way to communicate with consumers in a very direct way.
Got it.
So yeah, so um one of my first clients, she actually left Goldman Sachs and decided she wanted to pursue sort of interior design, also professional organization. So she started a company called An Organized Nest. And so I helped, get her brand out there. And one of the things was I pitched California Home and Design for their holiday gift guide. And I said, why don't you give the gift of organization? And they loved it. So we did this whole photo shoot. So again, it's always how can I think outside the box? How can I again sort of tell a story that maybe not be immediately connect the dots, because the editor was like, I loved it because everyone's pitching me holiday gift guide from you know the latest hostess gift to whatever, furniture, you know painting, art, and then you come along and you pitch a service, which I thought was great because who doesn't need to get organized in the new year? So it sort of dovetailed into you know, January, declutter, so
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great. So starting your own business then, after laid off, recession hits. What was that? How did you start acquiring? How did you get your own story out, your own message out to start acquiring customers?
Well, it's just I was thinking of when I was prepping for this, like there are different ways. Word of mouth is also a very effective way. And so for me, it was word of mouth. So I was lucky enough to um, have a network of people in the Bay Area, and or also when you do public relations, you tend to get to know people in all different walks of life, just given what, startups I've worked with. And that's one thing I love about my job is you become a little bit of an expert in many different subjects. And so for me, that was just word of mouth and referrals. And I gotta say, I too, for a longest time, just thought, oh, I might go back in house or I might, and so I sort of stayed a consultant for a number of years. And it wasn't until 2017, early 2017, that I came up with now my company, Type A Marketing, which is a play off my name and personality. So, and I decided finally I needed a brand myself, get the logo done and sort of and think about what I wanted to help solve, like as I said, a problem solver. Like what am I a solution for a company? And so with Type A, not only is it PR, but I think it's nice when you have all of marketing talking to each other. So basically, which other people have said this, like sort of let us be your CMO and let you run your company. So, we can elevate your narrative across all aspects of marketing. And so I do think as PR was evolving and as I talked about, influencers were becoming more and more prevalent, and people would then not only say, oh, can you handle my PR, but oh, do you know SEO, can you do my social, can you do my Facebook ads? And obviously I can't do all of that, but I was lucky enough to find other very senior folks like me who started out at big companies who have now on their own.
Mhm.
Like I know a great creative director, he spent 25 years at Nike and now he's on his own, kind of like I started out at Disney and now on my own. So I think many entrepreneurs are lucky these days that there are a lot of very seasoned quality people out there who you can snatch up because they're not in house at Nike or Disney anymore, and also then you're getting very senior folks working on your campaign or your project, because that's one thing I say when I'm doing new business for Type A. I always say to the person on the other end of the phone or across from Zoom, I'm the one doing the work. Or if it's me and a colleague of mine, we're not passing it off to a junior person. It's us doing the work. So not only do you have a very tight knit team, but a very seasoned team who, sure, we all had to get our start somewhere, but why do you possibly, maybe if you're on a very limited budget, have them be the guinea pig, like your product be the guinea pig for someone who's very green, who doesn't quite know the ropes yet? So that's also, I would say, as entrepreneurs are looking as PR as a way of getting driving awareness, you're very fortunate now to have, I would say now more than ever, a lot of boutique firms, consultants, who can help you, and you can also save you a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, I'm still an independent contractor with some big firms. Um, and there's a place for them, and there's companies who need and have a $20,000 a month budget.
Mhm.
But for most entrepreneurs, $20,000 a month is probably not in their wheelhouse. So, you can be very strategic and yet still get the same results.
So, at what point should a startup founder engage someone like you, a PR? How should they and when should they be thinking about a PR strategy?
Sure. Well, I would say when how are you going to go to market? And that philosophy could be, are we doing it through crowdfunding? Are we doing it direct to consumer? And are we brick and mortar? Or so right after you have the concept, um, done. And as I said, so if someone comes to me and type A is helping them with all different phases, that is one advantage of that. As a team, you're on all the calls from the get-go, so you see it evolve. But if that's not the case, it really is after the person has, you've done your basics. You have you're ready, you're found your manufacturer, you have your logo, you have your website, um, you have products, and so now you're ready to tell the world about your product. And how are you going to tell the world? And that is through public relations. And so it really is sort of in that after phase one, I would say phase two. But if you can start to, I would say, look for someone as you're developing the logo and your website, because that messaging I talked about should really be amplified throughout your communication. So whether that's in a press release, in a pitch that your publicist is writing, or on your website, it's really nice if that language is all cohesive. So I would say earlier rather than later, and it always takes longer than you think, because it's very noisy out there. I would tell an entrepreneur, just realize, editors at major publications, I think it was Men's Fitness I was had a meeting with in New York. She told me, she goes, I get 600 PR emails a day.
Oh, wow.
600.
Yeah.
Think about that. I mean, and we all suffer from our inbox exploding. So um so again, that's why you have to be really smart in what problem you're solving. Again, it goes back to, why should anyone care about your product, and what news are you delivering, and how can you convey that in a very concise way, because people unfortunately are so strapped for time these days. And um, also with PR, it may take a while to get going, but once it is set in motion, it can be one of your most cost effective marketing tools out there. Because to go back to what we first said, PR is free in terms of you're not paying the New York Times to cover it. Your pay is sweat, is paying your publicist to do the hard work, and to smile and dial. And we have to be very persistent. I mean, that is one thing I say. I'm always a polite nag, but and I think type A was sort of, I thought about that because I am a type A personality, because you've got to keep, if one angle's not working, part of my job is to find another angle, or another editor, or another vertical that can would be interested, because maybe it's we just sort of found with one of our products, butter twist, and camping and RV and boating, because a friend of mine bought a butter twist, and they used it while they were in Catalina on a sailboat and loved it. She said, "This is the best thing for the boat." And so that's a whole other vertical that you probably, because at first we went after, just for the example of butter twist, you go after foodies, and then, parenting, and how to make the morning routine easier for moms to get out the door. And then, so that just one product like butter twist can appeal to three or four different audiences. And there are media and bloggers and influencers that cover all those different verticals. I was trying to think of a way, how back in the day it was the four P's of marketing, and I was like, PR can almost be like the V factor, because you have validation, because that's basically what PR is. It's third party validation, and that's why PR can be so important. Um, and that is like one of our other products, like with Stix golf. You need, consumers want to be able to read reviews. Like, they don't want to just hear from you that we are the best golf clubs for the price, at a fair price. We want to get a third party validation, and usually that's press. And a lot of times that is where it can be so valuable, that so and so at Golf Digest thinks this is great, or they may be a disruptor in an industry, and someone who's an enthusiast in golf, we're like, oh, so I love Mike over at Golf Digest. I value his opinion. So it really creates that layer of that validation that other marketing avenues can't create, because Facebook ads, you're buying. I mean, it's an ad.
Yeah.
Even influencers. Now, I was going to say, with influencers, we're really starting to get in gray waters, because a lot of influencers, some will just flat out say, this is sponsored, I was paid, you know, the brand got in touch with me. But many folks will say, you just got to read the fine print, that even though I may have done a partnership with this brand, the opinions are of my own. And so we do see that more and more.
Mhm.
So as a PR person, I'm not only pitching media, but I'm also pitching influencers, YouTube video unboxing reviewers. Um, so that's where that can be a little more of a budget you need to set aside.
Yeah.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah. So as an aside, for those not familiar, what is a butter twist, and what are Stix golf clubs?
So butter twist is, I always say, is the ultimate butter tool. It really is a butter tool 2.0, because most butter tools out there only spread or store your butter. This one can cut and measure. So it is a 4-in-1, all-in-one kitchen gadget that is well designed, and it's the perfect thing. So, and we always say butter is everything, which is true. It makes it better in all forms of cooking. I think anyone who loves French cooking will agree with that. Or again, we talked about keto, or anyone who is in the healthy fats. So butter twist is your favorite device in the kitchen, that you never knew you had. So, or you never knew you needed, I should say.
Right.
And then Stix, wow, we're so excited. Stix golf clubs are, we say it's modern golf clubs for the modern golfer, excuse me, modern golfer. So, meaning that, overhyped tech for 99% of the population out there, it's the person doing the swinging. And if you're not Tiger Woods swinging that golf club, or Phil, or, anybody on tour for that matter,
Hmm.
um, that overhyped tech that could all of a sudden cost you $3,000 once you put your golf bag together. Um, we really wanted to streamline the process and make golf clubs that are look good but premium quality, without all the noise of some of the other golf manufacturers out there. So it's a complete set of minimalistic designed golf clubs. They're black on black. They're direct to consumer. We always like to say, think about the Harry's razors or the Casper of golf clubs, because we're able to pass along that savings to the consumer. So the you may have your beginning set you got at a garage sale for 250, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm ready for an upgrade, and then you start to do the shopping, and all of a sudden you are at that $2,000 mark. You're like, for a casual golfer, I don't need that. I just need something that looks good and performs well. And so that's why Stix Golf came to be. We're at about the $700 price point for a complete set.
Awesome. I'll make sure to put links to those in the show notes. But I think for the founders and entrepreneurs listening in, tell us a little bit more about kind of the nitty gritty of brands like that. Because I know with the kitchen product company, you got it on the Today Show. With the golf clubs company, you got them written up in Golf Digest. And how does that work? You just know people and you're able to pitch it, or tell us a little bit what goes on under the behind the curtain.
Sure. Yeah. So how the process, as I said, you come up with your messaging. Once that's done, then you write the pitch. And what we do is we pull I have a media software that I use that is able to pull a list of relevant media and all their contact information.
Mhm.
So that is basically what you do. You get your messaging down, you write your pitch, you write your press release, then you pull that media list of all the relevant media contacts. So, with examples, and media is now, and that's why it can get kind of squirrely and very a lot to oversee, because if you think about it, we've got broadcast media like the Today Show, you've got print media like Golf Digest, but Golf Digest is also online, and then you've got, think about all the influential bloggers out there, and so you can pull a media list that can be 500 contacts across all those different media types. And then obviously you prioritize, like I have, I can pull a list that where I can pull people who have talked about kitchen gadgets in the last 14 days. And I can also then select top tier. So then I know I'm only getting the very high, Good Housekeeping, Real Simple magazine, the Today Show. And so that's sort of where your publicist will really get in there. And that's, you write your pitch, and then it's just reaching out to these media folks. And as I said, it usually takes more than 2 emails to get in front of the New York Times, or 2 phone calls. Now, with the Today Show, yes, that's where relationships really can come in. Like, as I said, I've gotten a handful of people on the Today Show. So now I've started to develop a relationship with those segment producers.
Mhm.
And or now today, because staff and budgets have been cut, there are a lot of contributors. So, like, for instance, with Butter Twist, we worked with a lifestyle contributor. She is on the Today Show, 2 or 3 times per quarter. And so now her assistant and she will reach out and say, hey, here are the story angles. Do you have any clients that
Mm,
will work? So
okay.
that also makes it a lot easier if so it's a give and take. Some are that way. Um, and also we share now with Facebook and social media. That's also nice, because a journalist might post in one of these media groups, hey, I'm working on this story, or I need an expert and I'm on deadline. And then that's where probably she'll be inundated with 5 publicists who will raise their hand going, me, please talk to my expert, or please cover my product.
Right.
So yeah,
So
so it is.
in
Yeah,
terms
I'm
of the
sorry.
business models that make sense for PR, obviously, if you're consumer product, either CPG or some tangible good, or the software that's meant for consumers, that's kind of a no-brainer. Marketplaces, probably similar. You want to get the word out, especially if it's a broad marketplace. But for maybe the founders that are building, let's say, software for other businesses that are just trying to do a sales cycle into enterprises or large businesses, where they want decision makers at all these enterprises to be aware of their product. But does PR play a role in that kind of company, or how do you think about those kind of
Definitely.
B2B companies?
Yeah. No, definitely, because you have to realize that decision maker also is a consumer and reads the Wall Street Journal or reads trade publications. And so for a B2B play, it's the same mechanics, but you're just pitching different publications. And it can be so yes, you want a more mix of your trade pubs, and so you can find those decision makers. But it also is then getting into some consumer slash business publications, whether that be Wired, Fast Company, as I mentioned, the Wall Street Journal, some very deeper tech publications, because all those decision makers are probably reading those publications in addition to their trade newsletters. And I've helped find those newsletters and help pitch. Instead of pitching a journalist, it could be pitching a trade association, and how can we take our message and get in front of those stakeholders in a more B2B environment.
Got it. Cool. So then, all right. So then, it makes sense to engage a publicist, PR firm as you're architecting in the early days about what your go-to-market strategy is going to look like. Let's say
Yep.
that goes reasonably well, and you're off and running. Your product's in the market. What is the ongoing, the month to month responsibilities of your publicist look like? What kind of value can a PR person bring month to month, year to year, as your business goes along?
Sure. And that is where you work together as a team. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll call newsjacking. So what we'll do is I'm constantly thinking, how can I get my client in, or how is my client relevant to any current events that are happening? So um, a client I'm currently working with is in UV disinfection. And so obviously with COVID-19, it is all of us want a new tool to protect us from COVID-19. So it is how I'm always pitching and thinking, oh, we can, so and so was infected. If they were using my company's product, they it would have been eliminating that bacteria and it would have prevented that happening in the first place. So part of a publicist job is to constantly be looking, how can I weave my client's story, product, company into today's news cycle? So that's basically what we are constantly being creative and coming up with different pitch angles. And part of that is just, as I said, maybe it's a vertical we didn't look at before, like with Butter Twist, and that vertical was camping, boating, RV. And especially now, that could also factor in because, especially over the summer, a lot of people couldn't go on vacation. So remember, there was that huge uptick in RV rentals and sales. And so you constantly have to be aware of pop culture, news, news across all different aspects. And that's why I was saying your PR person is really sort of have to be a walking encyclopedia of the latest pop culture, whether it's sports, you know, news, healthcare, and uh, politics. I mean, it sort of like runs the gamut. And so your PR team or person, beginning of each month, you guys can sit down and say, okay, what story angles are we seeing for this month? Or do we have we hit a company milestone? Have we sold you know, did we just reach 1,000 users on or followers on Instagram? Um, did we just sell our 100th set of golf clubs? And so it's anything you can think of to be an excuse to go back out to media, just say, hey, by the way, we just hit this company milestone, sales are projected XYZ, or we just did a round of funding. Here's the people who, were part of the funding round. So it is what's in the pipeline. You sort of create an editorial calendar of what is happening that month, that quarter. And then the newsjacking, as I talked about, is where you're just constantly thinking, oh my gosh, that story just came out today. I bet we can totally fit into it. So you sort of drop everything and,
Yeah.
then pitch something because you want to take advantage of that news cycle. Because unfortunately, in today's world, things come in and out quite quickly.
So, at what point does the press release come into play? I often hear startups that just say, "Oh, we'll just do a press release, and then everything else will take care of itself." How
You
how,
know,
how
it
do you think about strategically using the literal or proverbial press release?
yes, it cracks me up that I mean, some people don't even, I don't even need to write a press release. I still think it's important to do it. I always tell clients, journalists probably read the headers, the top head and the subhead in your first paragraph. So you really got to drill it down. Um, and that's why sometimes with founders, I say, they'll be like, oh, I want to put my quote up at the top. And I say, well, unless it's someone famous, like Ashton Kutcher, he backs a lot of, sure, if it's him or Leonardo DiCaprio, yeah, you want the quote up at the top. But if it's someone who unfortunately is not yet well known, I would say your time hopefully will be there. You'll be in the limelight. Um, but the press release comes, and you want to be strategic in like what is our official company launch looking like? Because now with social media, sometimes your brand may already be out there in the public ethos. But okay, so a journalist can be like, well, you've been doing social for a while. So you've really, the press release is sort of like, okay, when are we going to officially launch? Like, when is the company going to say, you know, XYZ company today announced the, you know, XYZ product, blah, blah, blah. So um, it's in the beginning, and a press release, you can't just write a press release and expect it to get picked up. I've seen where some companies will say, oh, for, let's say, I'll just first say $100, I'll write a press release and send it out to 100 journalists. Well, that's, you are not going to see any pickup, because what it takes is that pitch that we put in front of the press release, that again, it's that problem that's being solved. Why should the journalist care? And then all the press release is doing is serving as the reference. So the publicist is a creative one and comes up with the pitch, and then we'll say, for further detail, read the press release below. And
Mm.
it's just more of a formality. It's a place of reference. It's all the, company boilerplates in there,
Do you
XYZ company, yeah, founded in
try to get
2010.
do you try to get the a story in a sort of a famous publication first and then get the press release out, or how do you, if there's an
Mm,
exclusive or something like that, or how do
Oh, so
you get that?
yeah. So what, so how, and I should have explained this a little bit when you said, how's the nitty gritty? It doesn't matter if you are doing a crowdfunding campaign, a Kickstarter, let's say, or just going direct to market. A PR person will pitch under embargo. So that's usually about a week or so before the announcement, because you don't want to go too far, or else people are just too busy. So
Sure.
it's that sweet spot of, you tease them and you say, can I send you this information under embargo? So they say yes. Then you send them all the details, including the press release. So the press release is comes to them then. So then they write their story, and then we tell them when that embargo lifts. So let's say it's Tuesday at 9 o'clock on the East Coast. If you have an exclusive, maybe CNET will run an hour early before everybody else runs.
Hmm.
Um, I will say most journalists now, I mean, exclusives, again, if it's something really big, but a lot of times people aren't asking for them as much. But it is nice if you can get a great, maybe interview with the founder on digital trends, get Gizmodo, CNET. Because I will say, for all the tech folks out there, those are the sites that really drive sales. Or if you're doing a crowdfunding campaign, we love to look at where sales come from or backers come from, and those handful of tech sites really can drive traffic to your website. And ultimately, isn't that why everyone's doing this? Is you want to make money or
Right.
get backers?
Right.
I mean, you want sales, and but then some people, you just as founders, just be aware there's no guarantee. If someone is guaranteeing you, that's not PR. That's advertising. That's an advertorial, which is sort of a, an ad and a editorial combined, and advertorial. But then that again, that's been paid for. Um, but some people say, well, I didn't see any sales from PR. And I said, but then PR isn't just about sales, because some of the people I've gotten on the Today Show had great sales, and then some people, the blip wasn't as high as we would have thought. And so, but what it does do, it goes back to that third party validation, because then you can put on your website,
Right.
you can put on your packaging as seen on the Today Show, and then if it's a review, like we used to do this all the time, obviously in gaming, if GameSpot says this is like the best use of graphics for the PS4, well, of course, like you're going to take that quote and attribute it to GameSpot.
Right.
So PR can also just be brand awareness, and that lives. Like another client worked with Snooze, white noise, a premium white noise machine. He is still, we are still seeing press come out from the activity we did almost a year ago, because it just sort of create it, it's a domino effect.
Mm.
And PR people, even if it's a subconscious thing, go, oh, well, you know, Popular Science said that was the best white noise machine. Well, it must be the best. Well, you know what I'm saying? So,
Right, right, right.
and it's sort of like if you do have a tech product, the person at Good Housekeeping, if CNET says it's the best widget, oh, okay, it's the best widget. And they'll almost be so press also use it for their own
Got it.
validation. So I think PR is a way to see sales. And sometimes you have to realize a person may read it on the way to work, like, or, while they're taking the train to work and then go to Amazon, and you may not see the direct correlation, but it all helps amplify getting your message out there. Um, and that third party validation is so key. Because, or as we were saying, like, I mean, I do it as a consumer. If I'm about to buy a new vacuum, or I'm probably a little more, I know exactly what sites to go to, and I'll ask my friends, at certain publications. But I think as consumers, we want to make sure we're happy with our purchases. And one way to do that is through PR. And also, just if it's a software, just real quickly, if it's an enterprise, again, if a decision maker in IT sees this article that about this, the frontier of where this technology is going in Fast Company, and then all of a sudden your sales guy calls that IT guy, and then, oh, I just read about that. So it can also help with that too.
So how would you advise, let's say, a founder team or a small business that's thinking about hiring a PR firm or a publicist? What advice would you have for them? How do you find a good one? How do you identify ones that maybe not so helpful? How do you go about that process?
So I think three sort of core tenets, and especially today, is kind of no BS, like the guarantee. No one can guarantee that they're going to place you in 50 publications in the first month. You can have KPIs and goals, but it just isn't the way it works. So I would say that could be a red flag.
Mm.
Also, as again, who's actually doing the work for you? Is the person who you're on the phone with during the proposal process the actual person who's going to be doing your work? Like I said, I've had numerous clients say to me, oh, another PR firm we worked with, we ended up getting passed off to the junior team, and they just didn't have the media savvy, or they just weren't being as creative, or their writing wasn't as strong, and so the pitches they would send over just weren't well written. So again, I think that is who's actually going to be doing my day-to-day work. Are you just popping in once a week to say, hey John, how are things going? Or are you the person actually doing my writing, doing my strategy? Because I think strategy is very key. It's not, unless it's something just a really basic consumer product. Otherwise, as I said, all these nuances and being able to find niche ways to tell your story comes from someone who's been doing this a long time. So I think those are probably the two biggest. And then, also look for the relationships they have with the media. A lot of times, if they can show you placement that they've received, so whether whatever your vertical is or have they gotten press in those publications previously? So those things I think are ones to look for, of just, and people I think who are good at PR could probably sell. I mean, because in essence, we're salesmen, right? We're selling, instead of we're selling it to a journalist. Um, so you've got to have someone, yeah, who doesn't give up until the job is done. And that too can be a little, and that's also where, as a founder, just give them a little leeway, because it may take a week, it may take 2 weeks, it may only take a day. And then all of a sudden, the New York Times is calling. So that's also, timing can be a little harder. Or like I'm telling clients for this week, if the country is consumed with an election, let's say, the media, everyone is distracted this week, and you're not gonna. I would. No one should be making any announcements this week because until the election, it's just because even if the person you're pitching is not a their beat isn't politics, it's going to just take over media landscape from consumer publications to women's to men's. So that's also another good point is look at timing. Like when you don't want to go out the day Apple is announcing the latest iPhone,
Right.
timing is also very key. So
Right.
that's another good point to make of just let's holidays, if you're not doing a great Black Friday, Cyber Monday promotion, I wouldn't even do it because the noise, the amount of people out there, it's really hard to break through unless you're doing something like I worked with a company that did battery packs for cell phones, and we sold it for 1 cent because the company also needed to unload some inventory, but it cost a penny plus shipping and handling. So I think it was 7.99. Well, that obviously got a lot of press because the headline was, get a battery pack for your Samsung for a penny.
Right.
So, yeah. So timing is also key, and just being able to look at all of that. Holidays coming up here. This year it's a little different, but like also if you're a tech client, we would never say do it in January because everyone's at CES. This year, CES is going to be virtual, so it won't be so much of an issue. But usually, again, everyone's at a major tech trade show, so you don't want to be trying to announce something unless you're at CES. And even at CES is hard because,
Everybody else is doing their
yep,
thing.
yep.
Got it. Cool.
And that also can help if your publicist has good relationships with journalists. You can ask them ahead of time, hey, when are you writing your CES story? When do I need to get you information? So your client then has an advantage because you're making sure they are getting the info to that journalist when he's writing his story, he or she. Yeah.
So this has been an extremely helpful introduction to public relations for, especially geared to more of a startup audience. Is there anything else that you would say? I'd imagine somebody who's listening or watching this probably has now a ton of questions, a ton of different things that they're curious about. Is there anything that we missed, or anything that you would say to encourage that person?
I was just thinking, it's a great way to increase awareness for your company, for your product, for your brand that sometimes is overlooked because people just think social media and wanting to get likes and followers and using ads to convert customers that way. But PR isn't dead and media is not dead. I know people, I still read a magazine, I read a lot online as well, but it's still, people still want to get that validation and a reader review in the New York Times, USA Today. And so I encourage you to use it as a way in your marketing mix, because that's actually one point I wanted to make is it's sort of like I always use the baking analogy. I know we've talked a lot about cooking, but baking analogy, when you bake a cake, you're not going to leave out flour or eggs or else it's not going to turn out right. So if you have everything else in your marketing mix, you've got promotions, you've got, you know, social ads, you're even working with some influencers, but it's nice to complete the pie, and make sure that you have PR in the mix.
Yeah. And before earlier, you talked about sort of the nuances of influencers and earned media. Do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I think now you want to look at how can I increase. So obviously, if you're a consumer product or even technology, who are the stakeholders in my field? And a lot of those now, besides maybe being the top tech reporter at XYZ publication are now influencers who consumers go to them to get that third party validation. And so I think as you're pitching journalists, you also want to develop a list of influencers to work with. Now, some may just take product and not as their form of compensation, because a good influencer, they they're going to spend a lot of time on you. They're going to create a video, they're going to edit that video, they're going to create a blog post, or they may create 5 or 6 social posts for you. And I've got to say, I think Instagram shopping is where at least a lot of people I talk to in different walks of life, male, female, young, old, they're doing a lot of their shopping off Instagram,
Mm.
and influencers live on Instagram. And so, or they become aware of a brand on Instagram. So that might be one of the first places it comes up in their story feeds. And then they'll go and do some research on the particular, you know, brand or product. And so I think that is why it's nice to have that nice mix of both influencers you're working with that. And I'd say a micro influencer might be a better way to go versus because if they are really good engagement with your audience that you're targeting, that's what you want. So a lot of times when I look at an influencer's following, sure, they may have 15,000 followers on Instagram. Okay, so then I look at their posts. How much engagement are they getting from our 5 likes? Okay, well, then that's not going to help move your needle. So you really want to work with an influencer that has a high level of followers, but really more the engagement.
Mm.
And do people trust them? So when they post something on Instagram or in their stories, people are reacting to it and purchasing or wanting to learn more. So I think that is something to be aware of. And so I think it's a mix of both. It's because I work with an influencer just like I do a journalist. I pitch them, I send them the info, I send them the messaging that we would like them to cover, and then you help tailor their video. Now that is something that with influencers you have a little more control over, because a lot of founders will say, "Oh, can I read the article before it gets published?" No. That is usually sometimes they'll fact check, but they'll just fact check it.
Sure.
I've worked with reporters at the New York Times, and then their assistant will fact check. Like they just want to make sure they got the company spelled right, the name of the person they interviewed, you
Sure.
know. But so that is where working with influencers can help massage that message more than a journalist, because I've had many times where founders, they're wrong, like they interpreted the product wrong. Well, that's their opinion.
Sure.
Person meant, so that is, sometimes I have to remind them that if it's their opinion, and if they don't like your product, they don't like your product. I mean, that just,
Right.
and what's nice if you have a good relationship. um there was someone at Business Insider who said, you know what, I just didn't have a good experience, so I'm just not going to write about it, which was nice. Instead of publishing something that would have been a bad review, they just decided to pass. And then, the founders still may be upset by that. What do you mean they didn't have a good experience? But I'm like, it's better they don't publish anything. Just, yeah. Right. Um, so yeah, I would say keep a little budget for influencers, and just work with them like you would like
Yeah.
a journalist. And yeah, but then knowing you can help massage the message a little bit more,
Yeah. And
control it, I should say.
you make a very good point that part of validation, startup validation, is that all the journalists and influencers out there actually have a very unique perspective given everything that they see. So if you have journalists and influencers fall in love with your product, that can be a really important part of your validation journey.
Right. And as I said earlier, I've seen companies where then they pivot the messaging based on how a journalist wrote about the product, because it made the company then realize, oh, because they're too close, they're too in the weeds. And even I was shocked that they compared it to this other product. I didn't even think it was in the same realm. And so I think for a founder, it can be good and bad. You might also find that if I've seen with some crowdfunding campaigns, they decided not to go through with production because it showed there was no need
Mm,
for.
mm.
So yeah, so it really, um, you can either get where no media are interested, combination with no backers, or media give you feedback that is, well, what's unique about this? Or they do write a story, but they're not, it's more not favorable, and so I've seen a few companies either go back to the drawing board and redesign or just scrap the project.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Alex, for this
Oh, thank you.
It's going to be, I think, very informative for me and for those that are listening in and watching. So, where can people find about you online?
So, just at my website, which is typeamarketing.com, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So, a lot of my info and background is all on LinkedIn, and just on LinkedIn, it's Alexandra, my full name. But no, that is probably the two best places, and I am on every social platform too. So,
Great. All right. Well, I'll make sure to put links in the show notes to your information there. Thank you again. This has been really, really informative. Appreciate
oh well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully, it's helpful for anyone out there who is looking to make their dream a reality. Because it makes me so happy when I see a founder all of a sudden their dream is in Golf Digest, and it's like, holy smokes, we just,
That's
so yeah, it's really
That's
cool.
great. All right. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.